Welcome to the February 7th, 2011 Annenberg Research Seminar talk. Although I should say that the speaker needs no introduction, as she locally would say, nonetheless I'll do a little introduction. Anne Balsamo is an alumna of the University of Illinois Communication Program, one with which we have many ties, friends, and even some graduates in the room. From there, she went to the Georgia Institute of Technology, and from there to Xerox Park, moving across the boundary between the academy and the real world. Not quite the real world, because it's Xerox Park. And she spent a number of years in a variety of institutions in that area, some of which she created. There's Onomy Labs, which she founded, owns.
I owe a lot of O's.
And Anne was recruited here to USC a few years ago to be the director of the Institute of Multimedia Literacy, which she did for a while, and is now a professor in interactive media and cinema, and, I should note, in the Annenberg School. So this is very local. And her area in particular is focused on the intersections between culture and technology, or really gender culture and technology, and is currently working on a book called Designing Culture, which we will get a preview.
So thank you, Larry, for not only the introduction, but the invitation to present the work and to show everyone. I recognize some faces from various projects and other units across campus. I'm delighted to be here. And I'm also delighted to put up for the first time in public the cover of the new book. I've been referring to this project as the Dead Tree Project. And as you know, it's been in the works for many years. I mean, projects like this, they're in the works for many years, and the cover came in my inbox about 2 days ago. So this is so exciting. I think it's going to be published soon. So today's talk, and I'm actually going to err on the side of a more formal talk, will actually move through 3 parts. The first part is a set of framing remarks that set the stage for an elaboration of a broader project that looks at contemporary practices of technocultural reproduction. And then the second part is an overview of some of the design research that I've been involved with over the past couple decades that focuses on the creation and exploration of emergent media forms. And then the third section is a brief introduction to new work that continues the investigation of the relationship between innovation and technocultural transformation. And I'll actually move out of the presentation into some of the work that's showing up on my new website that goes along with the book. So I'm starting with part 1, which is an index of culture and technology. And I want to argue that we're in the midst of a frenzy of innovation. Technological innovation has been called the single most important driver for the development of national competitiveness across the globe. In the States, much was made of the fact that the position of the United States fell in global rankings that measures investment in innovation from number 1 in 2005 to number 7 in 2007, and all these figures are from 2007. That's the lag time of the Dead Tree Project. Also noted at the same time with great interest was the fact that countries such as Denmark, Sweden, and Singapore had moved up in the rankings based on their dramatic increase in the size of investment that was being made in national innovation strategies. But technological innovation is not simply the concern of national governments. In a slightly different sense, it is also the preoccupation of increasing numbers of individuals who display their inventiveness as YouTube videos, Facebook games, and pithy blog entries. Terms such as DIY, the maker movement, and prosumer markets identify cultural zones where people engage in the creative fabrication of homegrown innovations based on keenly personal motivations to contribute to the plenitude of digital cultures. And then there's the rise of the creative industries, an emergent contested zone of cultural production that has garnered significant debate among and criticism from a wide range of cultural scholars. One key question in these debates focuses on the nature of creative labor and the methodologies adopted by governments to both generate and harness this labor for state profit. This is to argue that whether it manifests through the launch of new national programs, international initiatives, or as new popular cultural movements, innovation has become dominant 21st century zeitgeist. The common understanding of innovation focuses almost exclusively on its technological dimension. And relatedly, the value of innovation rests solely on the basis of its economic payoff or costs. The objective of the new book, which is kind of carried out throughout several chapters, is to argue for an expanded notion of the term innovation. Where the term innovation is used to refer to, where the term invention is used to refer to a novel idea or thing, I want to assert that innovation implies the creation of unique arrangements that will provide the basis for the reorganization of the way things will be in the future. In this sense, all innovations literally rearrange culture. However, the recognition of this fact doesn't often happen until well after the innovation is propagated through various quarters. So the question of the book is, how is it that discussions about technological innovation in the 21st century continue to bracket conversations about culture? This persistent blind spot is symptomatic of an impoverished understanding about the relationship of technology and culture. And as many of you in the room will be familiar with, cultural theorists Jennifer Slack and Greg Weiss explain that this dominant perception, what they refer to as the received view of the relationship between culture and technology, continues to see these as separate domains of human life. This received view is well represented in common understandings about technology that see it as, for example, the main engine of progress, and that propagate the myth that people have little, if no control over technology writ large. Holding tight to the received view like blinders on racehorses literally limits the view of the track ahead. As a consequence, the range of possibilities for technology under development are narrowed. This narrowed perspective sets up the conditions whereby technological failures are attributed in a most unsatisfactory manner to unintended consequences and unforeseen circumstances. But it is also the case that this received view of technology and culture also severely limits the imaginative space of innovation from the beginning. As this slide reports, apparently it is actually uncommon to pursue technological innovation for the purposes of cultural enhancement. And yet, even the most cursory review of the major innovations to emerge over the past 3 decades provides ample evidence that the significant impact isn't tied simply to its technological dimensions or economic payoff, but rather is measured routinely by the breadth of its social and cultural repercussions. This leads me to state the basic assertion of the project, that we need to take culture seriously in the practice of technological innovation. Moreover, I argue that those who are engaged in technological innovation are not simply involved in the creation of unique consumer goods, digital applications, gadgets, gizmos, or media genres, but also in the process of designing the technocultures of the future. This leads me to argue that the real business of technological innovation is the reproduction of technocultures over time. The print book is actually part of a Transmedia project that examined the work of professional technologists and designers who were, for at least part of the story, employed in the formal business of technological innovation. The project manifests across media. It's a print book that will be out, I think, in April, in a DVD, as an exhibit, as interactive online applications, as video pieces, and more recently as a blog, and I'll show some of these examples at the end. The broad claim for the project is that the process of technological innovation is the stage for the performance for 2 critical practices. 1, the exercise of the technological imagination, and 2, the work of cultural reproduction. In the print book, which allows me to do the work of kind of exegesis, of theoretical exegesis. I argue that the wellspring of technological innovation is the exercise of the technological imagination. I define this as the quality of mind that enables people to think with technology to transform what is known into what is possible. This imagination is performative. It improvises within constraints to create something new. It is through the exercise of their technological imagination that people engage the materiality of the world to create the conditions for future world making. In the active engagement between human beings and technological elements, culture too is reworked through the development of new narratives, new myths, new rituals, new modes of expression, and new knowledges that make the innovations meaningful. When people participate in the activities of producing innovation, their technological imaginations are engaged in a complex process of meaning-making, whereby both technology and culture are created anew. What gets reproduced is a particular and historically specific form of technoculture. In this sense, designers, those who I've studied, those who I've been a part of, work the scene of technological emergence. They hack the present to create the conditions for the future. My aim in the broader project is to elaborate how technoculture is reproduced through very specific practices of technological innovation. So the project describes some of the efforts that I was personally involved with over the past 2 decades. And I refer to these personal pieces of work not because they have enduring cultural value, but rather, following a gesture of Carolyn Steedman's in her lovely book, Landscape for a Good Woman, I employ the biographical to refine the theoretical. And I call this a work of weak theory, sometimes I call it a work of core theory, or more basically, following Anselm Strauss, grounded theory. It is also a certain form of feminist theory. It is a practice of thinking theory from the place of praxis. I'm going to talk about a project that led to the understanding about how innovations are historically constituted and historically conjunctural. So this is part 2, lessons about the nature of technological innovation. I learned firsthand about the conjunctural constitution of what counts as an innovation in my first post-tenure project at Georgia Tech. In early 1995, I and a colleague received an invitation to participate in the NGO forum that was going to be held in China in conjunction with the 4th UN Conference on Women. I organized a group of students and faculty. We registered as an NGO, which gave us lobbying privileges with members of the official UN delegation to the UN conference. As a way to meet people at the NGO forum, we built a digital call and response ritual titled Women of the World Talk Back. At the time, it was one of only maybe a half a dozen examples of feminist multimedia activism. Again, this was 1995. The piece was designed to be eventually distributed on CD-ROM. We were having the first CD-ROM burners showing up on our desktops. And we were going to create these CD-ROMs using these new innovative desktop technologies. We took the piece with us to China, where we showed it to hundreds of forum participants and gathered many hours of documentary footage and interviews. That was in September, August and September of 1995. By the time we returned, which was mid-September, a mere 6 months after we had first created the interactive piece, the web had moved from an emergent media form to become the dominant medium of social communication. Put simply, by the time we got back, we realized that the day of the CD-ROM was over. Because the piece incorporated a great deal of video and audio, it simply was not suitable for distribution on the web, especially in those early days. So to this day, the interactive documentary that was eventually created out of materials that we gathered at the forum has never circulated. So it will now, for the first time, packaged with the print book. And in this way, in an interesting kind of reversal of logic, the print book serves as a distribution channel for the digital artifact, which will, when it does come out and you'll have a chance to see it, it will last for about a year and a half before the underlying operating systems make it unreadable. It's already been ported and recompressed 3 or 4 times, which if you have any experience with building digital applications, you know every time you recompress, video and audio, something gets lost. So what you'll see when you see this, run this kind of this documentary is that it's grainy, it's pixelated, and it's scratchy like an old album. So it will actually show up as a new piece of dusty multimedia. There's a nice kind of story about how I got from Georgia Tech to Xerox Park, but I'm going to kind of leave that for a drink sometime. But a couple years later, after that initial project, I had an opportunity to do something that humanists don't get to do, which is to go and join the research staff of a major research kind of center in Silicon Valley. This was 1998, and I got the invitation to join a research design group at the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, Xerox Park. And the group I joined was called RED, which stands for Research in Experimental Documents. This group had 8 members with diverse backgrounds in computer science, materials engineering, toy design, sound design, architecture, lighting design, and experimental music. One of RED's projects was to create a museum exhibit based on technologies under development at the research center. I was specifically invited as a humanist to join this group to bring yet another set of methods and theories to the group's research design efforts, not only to contribute to the building of the exhibit, but also to the understanding of the group's research methods. The methodology for developing the exhibit involved performing a creative inventory of the technologies under development in each of the 6 park labs. Based on this inventory, RED created an exhibit called XFR, Experiments in the Future of Reading, that included 18 new reading devices, each of which was based on an embryonic technology that was literally on the lab in various places throughout the institute. The process of developing these new reading devices involved recontextualizing these lab-based technologies by developing stories about their possible cultural implications. In short, we were asked to imagine the multiple contexts within which these technologies might take shape and have effects in the future. This involved us in speculations about how the participants in future technological formations, intended users and generations yet to be born, would be implicated in the materialization and dematerialization of what was now, in 1999, a technology under development. In creating interactive prototypes, in giving demonstrations of the reading devices, and indeed in staging the museum exhibit, the members of RED articulated the meaning of the technology under development in terms of our own professional identities. I, for example, focused on the cultural implications of the pieces we were building, others focused on user experiences, and others on the aesthetic engineered quality of the built pieces. In the process of prototyping, demoing, and staging, what I learned is that we were also performing our own professional identities. Taken as a whole, the devices that we built were also implicated in the reproduction of the legend of Xerox Park. They were instrumental as props for a collaborative performance, not only of ourselves as individual researchers, but also of the identity of the research center as a place where the future is invented, and as the story goes, over and over again. In this way, participating in this research design effort illuminated for me the deeply performative and, I'll argue, articulatory nature of technological innovation. In a more mundane sense, what I learned is that innovation, especially technological innovation, involves the work of a range of participants, such as engineers, architects, and scientists, as well as those who are responsible for setting up the structure of development efforts, funders, clients, policymakers, and standards committees. The production of an innovation requires the involvement of many people who contribute distinct forms of labor: intellectual, artistic, managerial, representational, communicative, physical, emotional, and funereal. Their efforts and labor must be integrated. Tasks require coordination. Communication must be facilitated. Resources must be acquired, maintained, allocated, and dispersed. And users must be identified, recruited, and trained. All these functions, coordination, facilitation, acquisition, maintenance, allocation, recruitment, dispersion, are articulatory performances. They are the processes whereby the activities of individuals are organized as part of a collective effort that eventually gets called innovation. At a base level, the process of technological innovation involves a second notion of articulation, the wild multiplication of expressions that invest the technology under development with meaning. This is to say that there's a double logic to this sense of articulation. It both inevitably replicates previous meanings at the same time that it makes the expression of new meanings possible. Communications scholar Klaus Krippendorf describes the fundamental paradox of the designing process as oscillating between the aim of making something new and different from what was before, and the desire to have it make sense, to be recognizable and understandable. As he rightly points out, innovation cannot be so novel that it makes no sense at all. To be comprehended, the innovation must draw on understandings and literacies that are already in circulation within particular technocultures of users, consumers, and participants. At the same time, the innovation must perform novelty. And although there are many participants engaged in creating the meaning of innovation, there are particular participants who are often identified as core creative agents, namely designers and engineers. The meanings produced by these privileged participants are mediated through the production of objects that can be material as well as digital, representational as well as gestural, theoretical as well as physical. In this way, these participants and the objects are both instrumental in the process whereby the materiality of the world becomes meaningful. In fact, engineering design research, Louis Lucarelli, defines design as the place where two worlds collide, the object world and the world of interests of the design participants. In this sense, objects too participate in the innovation process by evoking knowledge, stimulating discussion and the production of discursive understandings, and by manifesting the matter of the world. In engaging with objects, human participants create provisional understandings about the technology under development, and these are conveyed to one another through various expressive practices. This leads me to assert that the collaborative co-creation of objects is also fundamental to the process of technological innovation and the exercise of the technological imagination. As many scholars in science technology studies have described, technology development is an extended activity of social integration, involving people with different domains of expertise and those who have different investments in the innovation process. Whereas the process of designing involves the creation of visual representations, narratives, fictions, and so on, these expressive forms do not manifest the innovation. Rather, technological designs are used as communication media among all participants in the design process. This leads sociologist Andrew Friedberg to describe technological design as negotiated achievements. He notes, as we understand when you're involved in the design process, that the rationality or the rightness of a particular design solution is an outcome of social interactions, which is at its most fundamental a process of meaning-making and communication. Designers perform valuable cultural work when they participate in these negotiations. They do this using a full range of expressive practices, such as storytelling, storyboarding, sketching, sculpting, image making, composing, and wordsmithing. In engaging in these practices, designers manifest creativity. But as we know, creativity is at base a cultural construct. What counts as creativity, and indeed novelty, vary from one culture to another culture, from one discipline to another, and from one historical moment to another. This is what leads many scholars who study the creative process to conclude that culture is as much a generative source of creativity as is any notion of individual genius. As Bourdieu reminds us, designers serve as cultural mediators by translating among languages, among materials, and among people to produce, among other things, taste, meaning, desire, and the cultural signs of creativity. Through the practices of designing, cultural beliefs are materially reproduced, identities are established, social relations are codified. In this way, culture is both, then, a resource and an outcome of the designing process. This is the meaning of the title of the book. And by engaging in these social activities, designers participate in the work of cultural reproduction. What I also learned during the process of designing the museum exhibit, the interactive documentary, and some of the other pieces that I've been involved with over the decade, is that there are many moments when the meanings of a technology under development are themselves under construction and under contestation. And although these moments may be fleeting, each moment of reproduction offers an opportunity to change the way in which technologies are developed, deployed, implemented, and possibly discarded. It also offers an opportunity to do something that hasn't been done before and to create something unique and untried. These, I argue, are the possibilities that animate the technological imagination. And it was this work that I am involved in now here at USC in the Interactive Media Division Lab and more recently in the Annenberg Innovation Lab that allows me to continue exploring the technological imagination at work. So this is part 3, the Research Academy and Technological Innovation. In 2004, I returned to the Academy, as Larry said, to take up a position as the Academic Director of the Institute for Multimedia Literacy. In this position, I was responsible for administering the IML's grant and Atlantic philanthropies that resulted in the creation of several of its academic programs, and actually for shaping the research that was supposed to come out of these efforts. At the same time, I became involved in some of the USC-wide institutional efforts to create collaborative programs across campus that were designed to illustrate Provost Nikias's emphasis on innovation across the disciplines. And a couple of these that I'm not going to talk about are the USC Singapore Center for New Media, that was a collaboration between Viterbi, the Marshall School, and the Cinema School. And then I was the early architect of the Diploma in Innovation for doctoral students. Well, in the process of engaging these institution-specific projects, I developed a model to help me think about and sharpen my understandings about the way in which different elements in the academy contribute to kind of broader technocultural innovation. And so I've been having an opportunity wherever I can to trot this model out, to make a kind of subtle and maybe small intervention in the discourses and the debates about innovation that are going on this campus. I also work very broadly across kind of the country in promoting the work of the digital humanities. I was one of the founding members of a group called Haystack, which stands for Humanities, Art, Science, Technology Advanced Collaboratory, where our mission is to promote the work of the digital humanities as contributing to kind of important innovation, not only in technology, but across the new cultural forms. So this model, and I'm not going to go into it in the depth, but I'm going to show you a couple examples, really grows kind of from where I landed, which was at the Institute for Multimedia Literacy, which was a new educational program that I understood had a relationship to disciplinary programs of media studies, of cinematic arts, of even writing across the curriculum and multimedia across the curriculum. And in those the efforts to build a new curriculum and new courses, invariably we came up with new research questions relating to what was the shape of literacy in a digital age, what's the implications of kind of tying kind of a critical media studies kind of curriculum and set of learning objectives to the production of learning how to author in multimedia environments. And in the Institute, the IML's context, this kind of resulted in a number of projects that I would take as examples of transformative applied research, where we're actually working on the development of new multimodal authoring applications, such as what is called SOPHI, is one of them, as well as Steve Anderson's work on Creative Commons and Critical Commons and so on. And these transformative applied research projects often involve developing technology prototypes that we would kind of use and iterate on, and kind of using a kind of typical design methodology. A companion piece was the work that was done by, in the project that was started by Tara McPherson and Steve Anderson, was the journal Vectors, which is a multimedia journal in a dynamic vernacular, where the idea was that some of these new efforts that were being done by by scholars kind of working at the new boundaries of digital media and scholarship. This was a new publication effort that would allow for these kind of multimodal and dynamic pieces of scholarship to circulate. What I was really interested in was not so much the way in which these things circulated out to new audiences, although that's certainly important, but how we could use them in the classroom as new technologies of literacy that would, of course, be the platforms for the development of literacies in the future. And this work in kind of deploying these technologies as kind of literacy technologies met up with, again, another kind of directive from kind of Provost Nikias, which was an emphasis on creating learner-centered pedagogies. So the process for me has been very illuminative in terms of understanding how these projects, kind of each individually, or how these elements link to one another for what I think is a longer-term kind of innovation, or longer-term notion of innovation. These are projects, again, coming out of the digital humanities that are not going to yield patents or even licenses, but rather have a broader impact, which is they're going to change the way in which cultures are lived in the future. So I want to get out of this presentation and show you a few things from the website that illustrate some of the technological applications that I've been developing. So, as I said, the Transmedia project involves the creation of a website. It's in its final kind of days of being tweaked. It has, again, a link to the print material, a description of the Women of the World Talk Back DVD. It also includes video pieces from the XFR exhibit so that people can see the exhibits kind of in action. So one of the things that the book can do quite nicely is the book can allow for the theoretical explication of what these exhibits were about. What it can't do is it can't show how the exhibits actually worked or what their dynamism was. So here's one of the exhibits.
Wood, I'm a dog.
It's called the Reading Eye Dog.
Everyone use common technologies, but in ways that people have never thought of before. They were unexpected. Simultaneously, we wanted to use technologies fresh from the research labs in Xerox Park, but in ways that even the researchers had never thought of, ways that push the bounds of our own much larger research agendas.
The Reading Eye Dog is something that had a lot of very interesting design challenges to it. Here we're using some off-the-shelf technologies like optical character recognition and speech synthesis, but we packaged them up in a new kind of interaction. What we've done is we built a device which is basically like a reading companion. It's a big metal doll, which is very cute to look at and fun to play with. And what it'll do is it'll just read a story to you. So if you put text in front of the dog like this, then you'll see the dog uses its eyes to show the text on a screen that's on the front of, or it's mounted on the front of the dog here. So if I put my hands in here, you can see the dog, you can see exactly what the dog sees. And then if I activate the dog by pushing the big green button on his shoulder, then I can hear him start to read.
The preamble to the Constitution of the United States of America. The people in the
One of our original design.
Okay, so the Reading Eye Dog is one of the 18 reading devices, and it was built on technology that is being developed at Park for text-to-speech synthesization and kind of miniaturizing that so that we would have portable translators, basically, or portable readers. We put it into the form of a dog after many experiments, putting it in the form of a humanoid robot. We thought that what we really wanted, or what people would really like, is kind of a companion kind of robot nanny that could sit and read with you. But then we ran into the fact that Hollywood conventions lead us to expect perfect diction from our humanoid robots because of C-3PO. So the idea that this reading companion would stumble over its words because the underlying applications are imperfect in terms of taking pictures of the image that are being read, the optical character recognition, and so on. The humanoid robot figure ended up sounding really dumb, and not very, not very eloquent. When we put the whole piece, all the guts, into the shape of the dog, the user tests revealed that people thought this was the smartest dog they'd ever seen. So, as well as the kind of cultural convention that we had to draw on, which was, of course, seeing eye dogs. So we kind of used, again, we didn't understand that until we actually put it in front of people, and we learned something about the cultural, the cultural kind of expectations that are shaped by the form of the technology. So in the website, you can have these video overviews that shows each of the pieces in action and so on. And then there's another section that I call, what would McLuhan say? We call it the McLuhan Analyzer. There's an overview of it. But so what this piece does is, there's a preamble that talks about McLuhan's 4 laws. And then what this does is analyzes each of the XFR exhibits according to McLuhan's 4 kind of key questions about media effects. So, his questions: what does it amplify that was previously, or what does it amplify? So amplify storytelling. What does it obsolesce? Reading in private. What does it retrieve that was previously obsolesced, being read to out loud? And then what does it reverse into when pushed to the limits of its logic, or to its extremes, textual illiteracy? So in each of the exhibits, here's one on the Tilty Table, have a different kind of McLuhan quote and then different McLuhan kind of inspired analysis. So this is a little piece of the kind of website that I use kind of pedagogically. Because what I do with my students is I show them pieces of video. I ask them to look at, what would McLuhan say? They have to kind of engage kind of McLuhan's reading of this. And then eventually, and these links aren't up yet, I will ask them to do their own analysis of not only these pieces, but then some of the pieces that might have been antecedents for them. So this is, again, is a very kind of simple piece. It uses material that's been out there for a while that's not, it's just video pieces that are, and I use it pedagogically to help my students understand how to apply McLuhan to pieces of media that they aren't already familiar with, so that it helps to defamiliarize kind of, and get them to understand how one reads a media kind of through a McLuhan lens. And then the last piece I'm going to show is another digital application, which is also kind of very simple in its intent and designed as a kind of piece of pedagogy and a very kind of selfish piece of pedagogy. This is a project kind of broadly called Mapping the Technological Imagination. This is a semantic web application that is designed as a reverse oracle. So instead of typing in a technology as you would in a search engine and getting answers or getting links about that technology and so on, what this semantic web does is return questions to ask about the technology. So instead of being given answers, you're given questions. And again, the point here is devising an application that would help my students ask more complex questions about the technologies that they find fascinating. And this first, I don't know if you can read it very well, the first conceptual infrastructure for this is based on the circuit of culture that's identified in the Doing Cultural Studies book, The Story of the Sony Walkman. So it starts with how is the meaning of the technology represented, what kind of identifications are constructed by people in relationship to the technology, what are the conditions of production of the technology, how is the technology consumed, how is the use of the technology regulated. And then if you click on one of these, the idea is that you then go to additional questions. So the questions might be about the semantics. So this is linking off of what are the conditions of production of the technology. What are the product semantics of the technology? What technical codes govern the construction of it? What are the specific applications of it? What are its affordances? How is it engineered? And then you can click on that and, of course, go on to more embedded questions. What work does the technology perform? How has the application changed over time? And so on. So the idea is that this is a map of interrelated questions. There is a theoretical infrastructure to the questions. They are not random, although at different times, given the fact that there are many of them sometimes linked, you might only see kind of 2 or 3 at a time. And a couple of the other affordances of this piece is that this section will allow you to trace your history through the map, so that when you click on a question that you find particularly interesting, it will go onto the history and you can kind of take notes on it, so on. It's kind of called breadcrumbing, so that you'll be able to find your way back to questions. And then eventually the options that I'd like to have are schematics of questions that are created based on different kinds of theoretical perspectives. So we could do McLuhan's 4 questions, we could do other kinds of theoretical structures for parsing the meaning of the technology. And then eventually we'll add an option for people to contribute their own questions. So that was the last piece I wanted to present. These 2 pieces here are very kind of simple things that I've done in collaboration with other people. They're for use in my own classroom, working with the students, particularly in the kind of culture and technology courses that I teach in Annenberg, the 349 and the 340 course, trying to get students to think more complexly about the relationship between these 2 things. The work that I'm doing now with the Annenberg Innovation Lab is a series of workshops designed to kind of translate some of these insights about technological innovation and the praxis and performance of innovation, to translate these into kind of learning exercises for those who are participating in the Annenberg Innovation Lab crunch competition and so on. So that's probably one of the things I'll continue to do in affiliation with Annenberg, is to create these workshops that allow people to learn design techniques for those who are not kind of coming out of programs that are design-based. So that's what I wanted to talk about. Thank you.
Questions?
Thanks for this presentation. It makes me feel like I need to learn a lot in order to be a researcher. But one of the things I was thinking about with your work and with your definition of innovation and especially the technological imagination is, how do you put this kind of stuff in conversation with efforts to monetize innovation? And I'm not saying that all those efforts always result in something that isn't productive or fruitful or innovative, but it was actually surprising to me to hear that you were one of the original architects of the innovation diploma thing, because, and I don't know very much about it, but when I looked at that first, I looked at some of the required classes, and most of them are how to figure out our business classes on how to market innovation as a product. And if you're thinking about the technological imagination as something, like you said, that is not just known but possible, what is really known is this kind of business model about how to market things like innovation. So I'm just wondering how you put your work into conversation with that.
I forgot to add one last slide, which is the other lesson of innovation is that failure is productive. So note the term, I was one of the original architects of the diploma in innovation. That original architecture went away.
Yeah.
So I argued, it was kind of a strategic intervention. They invited me to consult with them on this. They knew this book was coming out, and so I said, okay, I'll do that. And I put together the 3 courses that started with questions of culture and started with questions of what needs doing in the world. That was where the thing started. And then the methods that we would, methods that might follow from that kind of stake in the ground. Like what, whose culture, what culture, where culture, when culture, how do you, what are your values? So clarifying kind of designers' their own stake and ground. What are they interested in? Originally, it was in partnership with some of the efforts in the U.S. Social Entrepreneurship Center that Marshall's School has. So it seemed like there was a compatible, values-based, not economic-based foundation for the diploma, especially as we were imagining it's going to draw people from all over the place. And some idea was that we would first teach some methods of cultural analysis that could start to answer or address the question about how do you move from your values that you hold as a designer or somebody who wants to do something in the world to what needs done in the world and where does that need to be done through kind of using methods of kind of analysis and so on. And then we would move into, kind of the imaginative iteration of ideas and so on. And at the end, once we kind of cultivated an interdisciplinary design team, we would get to the process of what are the economics of this? Is there, is it something that can be done with, we were talking about this earlier, something that can be done in partnership with an NGO? So your idea is actually an idea and someone else will be the one kind of working out the details of delivering or so on? Or is it something that is a brand new idea that can be either patented or licensed? So the economic return was, for me, at the end of the process. It got exactly flipped when it went to committee. It went to a graduate school committee. It had to because they wanted it as a new curriculum effort. There was no way that Stevens could put out a curricular offering, so it got turned into something else that makes sense from a very different paradigm of culture and design, which is you start by analyzing what needs aren't being met that can be monetized. That leads to a sense of a market that maybe not yet formed, or a market that doesn't yet know they need the product or the service or the application, and then you move from there to user needs, product needs, delivery, economics of production, distribution, maintenance, and so on. So it got it entirely flipped.
Well, and my point was not to, call you out for being an architect, but and also again, not to say that always results in, kind of marketizing, and that it always results in something that it doesn't have cultural value. It was just a point to say that this kind of work that is about insisting on the culture of technology and and their kind of their constitutive nature rather than as two discrete realms, I think is absolutely crucial for the way in which this school and other universities are using the term innovation. That we have to kind of push back on it being flipped.
This is one of the privileges of having years under my belt, is that I can assert the importance of taking culture seriously, and I've seen people choke on it. I've seen people because to them it's a wishy-washy concept, or it doesn't have as much kind of veracity as engineering specs do, and so on. I'm like, well, there are a lot of people who have expertise in doing cultural analysis of emerging technologies. They're not the people who are in your engineering programs and so on, but they're studying these things, they're writing books on these things, and so on. And so that I feel like I have license to say that because I have, in some respects, nothing to lose. I don't need to patent. I don't need to do licenses. I don't have a portfolio of things that my job is not dependent on me patenting, right? Which is a good thing, right? Barely dependent on me publishing books because this is only the second one.
I'm really interested. As someone I've got a PhD in sociology that does technocultural work. I did a piece kind of bouncing off your cyborg in the web in 1996, and people said this should be in a computer science journal. That idea that why. I just want to hear your kind of take on it. Why do you think the social sciences have been so reticent to take on this technoculture? How societies being shaped or changed or impacted by these new cultures, even the whole digital world. It seems like they want to put it over in, as you said, sort of like computer science or engineering or something. That's not really their realm of expertise. Looking at the cultural side of it. So why do you think the academia has been so slow to sort of embrace that, or has in fact even rejected that in many cases? as you said, there's only one program on technology. Yeah. What's your take on it?
And I thought
What's the
Clue
thing again?
program was no levels 4. Well, in some respects, you know, I would return to CP Snow and the two cultures problem, which is actually a multi-cultures problem, but that kind of very strong divide between, you know, the literary and the mechanical, or the literary and the kind of technological. So it's an old divide, and I think, you know, cultural theorists and cultural analysts have been kind of trying to look across that divide for a long time, understanding that to do, like the, you know, Sony Walkman book showed, to do trenchant cultural analysis requires that you get involved with things that are cross-disciplinary kind of literatures, so the production methods and, you know, and the institutional kind of logics and the economics of the product and development and distribution and so on. So I think that it's because there's not a lot of disciplines that have taken kind of that project on. They've been more disciplined in looking at a narrow slice of the entire kind of phenomenon of technology development, distribution, dissemination, and so on.
It takes that kind of cross-discipline.
Right. And so partly the last chapter of the book, you know, argues for the development of these cross-disciplinary design teams that have kind of cultural theorists or analysts or humanists, broadly construed, on the team to be able to ask the questions about cultural significance and cultural implications all the way along, not simply at the end. We had some precedent with the Human Genome Project 15 years ago when it got started, and they constituted from the beginning an ethics committee. So I mean, that was a gesture in the right mode, but now I would want. And you know, the thing is, I mean, industry's way ahead of us on this.
Oh, yeah, that's the.
You know, I mean, IBM just hired yet another friend of mine who's a humanist anthropologist, right, who studies workplace practice.
Yeah, that's the thing.
And not for user specs, not to design this interface better, but to really understand people in their indigenous places that are going to be the recipients of IBM computers or IBM applications.
That's the thing.
I'm really interested in seeing the documentary pieces that come out about the Beijing Women's Conference. My sort of understanding of that whole process came through this filter of folks who were involved in WomenNet, which later became part of APC.
Yeah.
And I know that so this is a group of sort of NGOs and civil society activists who organized a lot of women, especially from the Global South, to be able to go to Beijing. And during that process, really hooked up a lot of local NGOs and nonprofits with email accounts and showed them how to use FTP and bulletin board systems and stuff. And again, this is like in the late 80s into the early 90s. And I know that now today they've got this program going on in Singapore called Take Back the Tech. And they're gathering sort of video stories of young women from all around the Southeast Asia region around their engagement with technology. And I just wonder if when it comes out sort of as a DVD or sort of online, if there's a way that it could then recirculate back out through the APC network to probably really connect well to that group of folks who have been involved in that actual process, but then linking it to what they're doing now in terms of pushing that even further today.
That would be great. I mean, I would love to work with like younger feminist scholars to kind of look. I mean, this is one of the kind of the side projects that I do because I don't teach gender studies or science, technology, and gender any longer. But one of the things, like, we're really perplexed because we don't, across the world, with all these feminist scholars of technology, we don't know where to send our students who want to be trained in feminism and technology. We don't know. So what we know these networks, but academics who would want to do this kind of work, everyone has 1 or 2 students, but there's no place where they can be trained to do it, and there are so many projects. There's so many projects. Good feminists.
This is kind of an easier, or maybe a simpler question, but I was wondering how your work on like technoculture studies and like innovation, how do you see it playing into, I guess, our current educational system as far as like the new needs of like, I guess maybe like high school age kids or younger growing up and how to meet and address those so that they're better prepared and they're better, I don't know, ready to, I guess, see this new like techno world that, kind of running into.
Well, one of the polemics is to argue about taking not only taking culture seriously, but taking seriously the responsibility to educate the technological imagination and inspire it across the educational curriculum. And I don't work so much on issues of like school programs and formal schooling, because that's a very daunting project. But I do look at and have done some research that was sponsored by the MacArthur Foundation on the role of community libraries and museums as part of a distributed learning ecology. So that what we understand now is that school is in many places for young people, youth, the one digital generation, whatever you might want to call that age group, and that they learn in many ways as they kind of traverse media flows and networks. And so I'm interested not so much on what goes on in their kind of formal classroom or even in their after-school classrooms, but I'm interested in what goes on in the museums, because a lot of the work I've done is shown up in museums, kind of popularizing scientific understandings and so on. And then the next thing, the next polemic for me is reconceptualizing the role of the community library and conceptualizing it as a place where the cloud and the community kind of meet. So an embodied place of learning where all of those really interesting learning activities that are now available kind of through different websites and mobile applications. The community library is a place where people across generations can get together to form communities of practice. So the cloud enables all kinds of new communities of interest. Kids learning from lots of formal learning applications as well as informal learning applications and so on. And how do you translate those communities of interest where a kid is interested in this or this and this into changed practices, changed habits, new sensibilities, new skills? And I think that's an embodied project that needs to be done somewhere with the kind of help of an expert user, an expert knower. And so I'm imagining the role of the library as being kind of more robust in that.
Do you see yourself in the future working on some kind of like library, I guess?
My new thing is tinkering spaces. So I'm interested in these make spaces. That the community library would also become the community garage. And yeah, I just need a garage. It doesn't have all my excess furniture.
Okay, next week.
Thank you.
Someone